Hello, this is Tom from 6 Foot Networks, and I'd like to go over some of the system preferences that are available in the current macOS edition, aptly named macOS Mojave. This is version 10.14 that was released by Apple in October of 2018. Basically, the system preferences is how you go through and customize how your Mac behaves in a whole array of functionality, and it's the go-to place to make any settings changes for network, your iCloud, as well as any file sharing or even audio levels. So we're going to start by going through very briefly through each one of these, and if there's any questions, feel free to post them down in the comments. I'll attend to them when the time comes. Let's start off with general. General is basically the appearance pane of the macOS operating system, and here you can see that in Mojave we have several new functions that haven't existed prior to, and you can literally go through and customize any of these to your liking, from appearance to accent colors to highlight colors, sidebar icon size. Now this video is not going to go into total details with each and every single one of these, because I believe that each of these panels could probably be its own video, but for now the abridged version is what this is going to be. Basically, any of these visual appearance settings can be found under here. You can also change your default browser if you have several installed. You can change that, as well as some of the nifty file handling that macOS now has. Even something as simple as hiding the menu bar up on top, you can see it disappeared. You just gained a little bit of real estate just by checking a box, which was previously not possible without third-party utilities. I actually prefer that menu bar there, but some people like to get rid of it. Basically, that's pretty much it. It's the general pane. You can set your theme from the light theme to the dark theme. I use my computer in very dark areas, so I prefer the dark theme to save my eyes from the bright light that gets emitted through the light appearance. Going back, the next is the desktop and screensaver. Very straightforward. Between both of these, you can set how you want your computer to look and behave. So here we're under desktop. We're looking at just basic defaults that come with the computer. You can see there's a whole bunch of them that you can choose. You can also bring in your own folder by hitting this plus button and expanding it to load your own picture on the background. I just use the default one. There's also dynamic ones that change with the time of day, which can be chosen here. Screensaver, pretty self-explanatory. You can set all these however you want. I picked just the default one that shows my computer name, because of the fact that when I'm looking at three of these computers side by side, I need to know which one's which. So this one just happens to be, my primary 13-inch MacBook Pro that I can easily identify from this scrolling text that will happen when the time starts. Now, I don't have my screensaver start automatically. Here you can specify a threshold where they will start after a specified amount of time. I don't like doing that, because if I'm presenting a slide deck, or if I'm watching movies or something, this has a tendency to just take over. I prefer to set hot corners, where you can actually specify each corner of the screen, each one of these four corners, to do an action. So usually, I may have start screensaver over here, and maybe, I don't know, put display to sleep on this side. So that way, if I move the mouse into this corner down here, it'll literally put my display to sleep. And then when I move the mouse again, it'll wake back up, and it should ask me for my username and password for security purposes. I highly recommend that you practice security not by obscurity, but you know, in a real effort. Moving on, the next item on our list is the dock. This is literally this area down here with all your applications that are listed. You can drag and drop, you can remove stuff from here if you don't want it. For example, if you wanted to get rid of this tool, you would just drag it out of the dock about an inch away from the bottom. You'll see it pops up remove. If I let this go, it'll disappear and it will be gone. I can always bring it back from the applications folder later. Here I can set under the dock utility many settings. You know, you can even check this box to show the recent applications that would show up between these two items down here. Not really into that, so I'd have it disabled. The position on screen, excuse me, is literally where you want the dock to live. You can have it on the left side, you can have it on the right side, or on the bottom. I'm a little torn between these two. It usually ends up being on the dock, and then I end up hiding it so that way, like that. So that way when I move my mouse down, it pops back up, but when I'm not using it, it goes away. In fact, I will leave it as such. The next setting is mission control. This is one of those utilities that has managed to survive all these releases of macOS, and it basically, like it says here, it gives you an overview of all your open windows, thumbnails of your full screen applications, and dashboard, all arranged in a unified view. This is one of those things that I don't use dashboard. It's off by default, but you can actually turn it on as a space, and basically you would see all your windows and all your dashboard applications listed in one spot. These are also commands that you can use for keyboard and mouse shortcuts to do these various functions. I normally don't use them, just it's one of those things that power users normally use. For example, when I do these demos, the less stuff I have running on these computers, the better, because I fear that at some point I'm going to be in the middle of a presentation, my mouse is going to roll into one of these corners and something's going to pop up or hide, or you know, something's going to happen, and then, you know, all blazes are going to, you know, run loose. You can enable mission control via hot corners as well. If you bring that up, you can have mission control, launchpad, dashboard. You know, these are part of that menu option, which is why this window persisted. You could see the start screensaver and the put display to sleep that I set from the screensaver window. It persisted. This is the same function, but it allows you to control all of this via moving the mouse into a corner. Moving on, language and region, pretty self-explanatory. This is where you set, you know, if you want 24-hour time, which I live by. My brain has a hard time working with 12-hour time, and this is one of those settings that I've asked for many years that allowed me to literally run my computer in 24-hour time, so I don't have to think whether it's AM or PM. You know, a lot of times I work in data centers that are in basements that have no windows, so I have no perception of where the sun is during the day. And there have been times in the past when I've worked for more than, you know, 12 hours or 16 hours, and I literally had no idea if it was night or day. And then looking at a clock from a distance, when it said that it was, you know, 5:49, I didn't know if it was 5:49 p.m. or 5:49 a.m. So I prefer 24-hour time so I can tell AM, PM without actually thinking about it. So I'll leave that checked. Here you can specify preferred languages that will allow your system to translate various things into, including the menus. And you can set keyboard preferences along for the language in here, as well as in the keyboard pane, which we'll see in a minute. Security and privacy. This is one of the first things that I look at when I install macOS. Normally I check these two boxes and I make sure that password requirement is set for after sleep or screensaver begins. I think by default these are disabled, but you can re-enable them right here by checking this box and then putting in your password, and then you can specify a threshold here as to how long you want the system to wait before it asks you for a password. Immediately, the second it sleeps or screensavers, it'll ask you for a password the next time you move the mouse. And then you can specify 5 seconds. So say you move the mouse into this corner, which is set to sleep on this computer. If you move this mouse into this corner, within 5 seconds you can bring it back out and it's not going to lock. So I'll probably leave that. Any further setting, you can see this is grayed out. Any changes that are system wide, you have to unlock, you know, the pane so that it can make those changes as an administrator. And you can see that this dialog is now enabled. I can check this box and I can set a lock message that'll show up on the screen when you're at the login window, or in basically when the screen's locked. Yeah. Here you can also control your gatekeeper, who you want to be able to install apps from. I recommend this bottom function because not every app is available on the App Store. So if you just check this box here, you can only install apps from the App Store. Every other app will say it won't install it. And then when you're done, I will uncheck that because this is just a demo system. This is where you can securely encrypt your data on your hard disk. My disk is encrypted because I have another user account that I use for production work, for editing and whatnot. And this disk has already been previously encrypted. I set up this account for this demo, and basically this would tell you to turn it on. You first have to unlock it, so that way you can make the changes globally. Once you unlock it, this button will become active, and then in this case it's already on, so I can turn it off, which I don't want to do, so I'm just going to lock it. But that's basically it. So File Vault is your whole disk encryption mechanism that keeps your data safe and secure, and I highly recommend this on every mobile computer, regardless whether it's PC, Mac, Linux. They all support some form of disk encryption. Firewall is pretty self-explanatory. If you're browsing the internet without a firewall, then you may be asking for trouble. Firewall is the most basic mechanism that keeps unwanted network traffic from reaching the heart of your computer. In this case, by default, it appears to be on, and literally, like it says there, the firewall is turned on and set up to prevent unauthorized applications, programs, and services from accepting incoming connections. Very good thing to have. If you unlock this, you can specify options. If you have some custom programs or utilities that you need to be able to talk through the firewall with, you can specify those here. Privacy is another big one for me, because I like to know what applications are interfacing with some of the built-in ones, like say the camera. You know, any apps that request access will show up in this window, so I will know that, for example, if I have the Twitter app, or if I have some other program that will require access to the camera, it'll actually list it here, and I'll be able to see just by scrolling through. For example, like this microphone, this application requested access to the microphone. I can at any point in time disable it if I'm not sure of what it's doing. Location services, this is one of those catch-22s. Some people are very stern on privacy, where they don't want their location to ever be published, but I find that a lot of features are crippled when you turn this functionality off. A lot of things, you know, tailored to your needs rely on your location. You know, if you're trying to find a restaurant near you, it's going to look for an address. You know, it's going to look for your location. and if you're not giving it permission, then you'll have to specify all that information, and it's just one more thing that you have to type. And with location services, if you trust the app or the service and you know they're reliable, they're not you know, some service that can steal your information, or they've had history in the past of getting customer data stolen, you can actually make sure at any point to disable that or enable it per case, etc., etc. That's pretty much it for the privacy and the security and privacy pane. And then, you know, you can read about it more here. If you go under about, you can actually read, you know, what it tells you. And Apple's very good at documentation, and they tell you how your data is managed, and you know, basically you have to agree to provide access to these apps. That's pretty much that. Moving on, Spotlight is macOS's indexing engine, and by default, when you first install macOS, it goes through and it indexes your entire drive. Now granted, at the beginning you only have a certain amount of things that are on the computer, and most of them are from Apple, but you can see here that as you go, it'll start indexing files by their type, and you'll be able to show these, you know, by clicking on this little magnifying glass that's right up here. You can actually search the disk for anything, and it, you know, you can even show stuff from the web, iTunes, App Store. You can even look at movie show times. You can specify stuff in here that you can search on the machine, on external disks, or even an XSAN if you have an XSAN system set up in your environment. More on XSAN in another video. I will do another detailed XSAN breakdown on Apple's large file sharing, large block file system. The privacy tab literally allows you to add certain disks by dragging them in here, and basically privacy means that Spotlight won't index. This can have negative effects too, especially if you're in a hurry and you're trying to find something in an email or something you saved somewhere on your disk. You know, if you were to add like this, you know, it'll say, you know, search feature won't work in some application, and so on and so forth. So I recommend against privacy. Unless you have some external hard drives that are attached all the time, you can drag those in here, so that way Spotlight doesn't churn your external drive to butter. Basically blends it down because it's accessing it so much and trying to keep the index current. But for the local hard drive, I usually keep it on. Notifications are literally that. macOS now, as of a few releases ago, I'm sorry, has this ability to control how your notifications work and when they work. So you can actually turn on Do Not Disturb like you can on your iPhone, and you can also specify when Do Not Disturb is turned on, and you know, if you're mirroring or projecting to TVs and whatnot. This is a interesting utility that I find very helpful in organizing your alerts. Before, if I got 10 alerts from 10 different softwares, there would be no organization to those whatsoever. In fact, by default, it's latest takes precedence. So if the latest message comes up, all the other notifications would get buried. Now you can group them, you can selectively pick what notifications you get, so you can, for example, turn on your mail notifications and turn everything else off. So that way, in this window here, under notifications, here you will see all of your notifications. And I'm currently running Do Not Disturb to prevent anything from popping in or making noises during this video. And you can also have kind of a dashboard of the today window. Tells you the date, any calendar items, some default stocks. You can add your location here for weather, and then you can also add more widgets, so to say, for the notifications window, like calculator, find my friends, any of those. Done. Get out of that. By the way, this notifications window can also be put into a corner using the hot corners function that we looked at earlier. And basically that function will then, if you drive it into any one of the corners, it'll show up basically like this. I will demo that real quick. So if you wanted to use hot corners, we'd go back under desktop and screensaver. You can put notification center in, say, the top right, because it's close to where this notification icon lives. And then if you hit OK and go back to this, when you drive the mouse into the corner, you can see your notification window pop up, and then if you click away, it hides it. That's kind of a useful function. I use it on one of my my work machines that I use for office type work, for emails and calendaring. So that's the first row there. The next row is basically system level settings. So here you can specify the display functions, such as resolution, how you want your text size, if you want larger text or smaller, how do you want your brightness to be, automatically adjust brightness in the event that, you know, you're outside and you need more light, or in your dark office you can have it drive the brightness down so you're not blinded by it. You can also use AirPlay display to share your screen to a projector via Apple TV or some other conference room device that you can easily share your image with a whole room of people. You can specify colorimetry if you're a pro and you know what you need in terms of color output. You can change that here. I usually just keep the default here. You can also complete calibration here if you want. If your screen's a little older, this calibration utility might come in handy. It also works great in edit environments where they have to make sure that all the screens are exactly the same. And then you can actually take the profile and either copy it or distribute it to all the machines, and they're all roughly the same, especially if they're the same vintage make and model displays. Night shift is a feature that Apple released a few releases ago. It shifts the color spectrum to the warmer side, so by default, you know, without night shift on, your display tends to be bluer. More blues have a tendency to disrupt certain brain waves, certain brain functions, and prevent you from ultimately releasing melatonin. So if you're looking at an iPhone right before bed, or you're working on a computer, if your computer is set to not have night shift or doesn't have this functionality, you may notice that it's harder to fall asleep. Like you could be yawning, but you're having a hard time just closing your eyes and literally falling asleep. With night shift, it'll shift the color spectrum of the screen to the warmer side, which will ultimately allow your brain to properly set itself for sleep. And then you can also specify the color temperature if you want it more warm, less warm. Less warm would be more blue or more natural, and more warm would be almost yellowish, almost like an old CRT screen that's about to be put in the trash. So you can balance that out here. And then you can of course schedule it sunset to sunrise. This is what I use on my iPhone. I don't usually use my computers at night. I use my mobile devices, either my iPad or my iPhone. So I schedule it sunset to sunrise, and that way when the sun goes down it automatically shifts, and then at sunrise it automatically reverts back to normal color. That's pretty much that. Let's go back to this. Energy saver, pretty self-explanatory. This is how your computer is handling power adapter settings, battery settings. On a Mac you have both of them broken down here. You can just click between them. This is totally customizable. Power nap's an interesting feature. I recommend using it when the adapter's plugged in, but I don't recommend it if you're on battery, because this can kill the battery depending on how much email or network activity your computer does. So, and then you can of course schedule the computer to start up. And I wouldn't recommend this for laptops, but for desktops this is great because you can set it to start up or wake up, you know, on a certain day at a certain time. So if you know you have to be in the office every day at 8 a.m., you can literally have your computer boot up at 8 a.m. and when you get to your desk, it'll be sitting there for you, and then you can either sleep it or shut it off at 5 o'clock when you leave. Kind of works out great. These policies are usually disabled by administrators, so if you have a Mac that's managed by a company, by a centralized management system like Jamf or something else, these utilities tend to be disabled because they like the Macs to stay on all night long so that they can deploy security updates or do reconnaissance on the machines when they're idle. Keyboard, another self-explanatory one. You can set all of your settings for keyboard, text. You can actually specify like 3-letter phrases that the computer will then change to actual sentences. So if you want to put, ILU, you can say here, I love you. So that way, when you type ILU, it'll automatically put I love you. And then you can set all the other options here, languages, whatnot. Shortcuts are interesting. Every menu item, if you look here on, I'm going to try to do this without flipping out the menu. You can see that, if you're in the edit menu, all of these commands here ultimately have shortcuts right here. Now, a lot of these shortcuts can't be edited, but some of the custom ones you can edit here. And these are the shortcuts. So you can actually set them, keyboard shortcuts. What shortcuts do you want? Screenshots to take, any of that stuff. You can actually set things to make your life a little easier. Again, this is a power user slated function, but if you're curious, you can always set one up and have fun with it, explore. The one thing with a Mac is it's very hard to break. Even if your disk is full with pictures and documents that you spent many months or years collecting, if you break the OS, you can always reinstall the OS, and guess what? Your data sticks around. It will not be lost unless you erase the hard drive. If you wipe the drive, then you lose everything. But you can easily boot to the recovery partition. I'll explain more on the recovery partition in another video. You can boot to the recovery partition and reinstall the OS, restore it back to defaults, and all of your documents and settings, all of your documents and pictures and applications that you downloaded will still be there. Input sources, you can, if you're multilingual, you can set up your keyboards here, and then also have the option here to show that up here in the menu bar. If you're, Spanish or German, you can put that here. And then when you're typing messages, it'll automatically detect that you're typing in a foreign language, and it'll adjust its, predictive type and a few other settings to that language, which is really nice. Dictation's nice. You can already see it flipping out to my voice here. You can literally turn on dictation and have the computer type out what you say. And here's how you trigger it, and you can pick a language. You need to download this dictation pack, which is a 1.2 gigabyte download. It doesn't take long. That'll install the files that the Mac needs to function fully with dictation. The mouse, no mouse found, but here you can attach a Bluetooth mouse. Self-explanatory. Trackpad, since I'm using a laptop, you'll be able to see all of the settings for it. And actually, what's amazing is Apple gives you a demo right there on the right hand side if you roll over it. So I'm not going to spend too much time going through these. These are just literally how do you want the behavior to work for your trackpad. Printers and scanners, pretty self-explanatory. This is our office brother printer that we have at 6 Foot Networks. It's in our headquarters. I'm off-site, so the printer is not found, and it is an AirPrint printer, so we print wirelessly to it via the Wi-Fi, and you can set all those settings in here for it. I'm not going to spend too much time in here because every printer is different. Sound, pretty self-explanatory. Here you have the option to change sound effects, your output and input, and here you can see the input level bouncing with my voice. But what's great about this is if you have more than one output source, say you have an external some kind of external source via Thunderbolt attached to the Mac, it'll actually show it up here and you can use it. So if you have an amp or something that's powering speakers that's Thunderbolt enabled, or another interface, USB maybe, you can actually specify the output there, and you can actually specify which interface or which output you want sound effects to go through. So the system plays sound effects for mail items. If you press a button or you cause an error, it'll make its bing and ding or dong or whatever. You can actually specify if it comes out your internal speakers or the ridiculous speakers that you may have attached to it, via USB or Thunderbolt. I recommend internal speakers for sound effects, as through a massively amplified sound system, the sound effects might be ear-piercingly loud. And then of course you have your input. If you have more than one microphone source, which currently I'm only using the internal microphone, you can set that here based on what your needs are. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Startup disk is for advanced users, but here's where you can have the Mac boot off of any bootable drive that you have attached to it. So if you have issues with your Mac not booting, you can easily attach a disk that has a bootable operating system, and then you can pick it here and hit restart. You can also boot the computer in a mode called target disk mode, which ultimately turns this entire computer into an external hard drive enclosure that you can connect to between computers, a Thunderbolt cable, and then you can boot this computer into target disk mode and then see the hard disk on the other computer. Now you will have to decrypt the drive because we have File Vault enabled, so that's a security measure, but you will still have that option to do so. Next thing down, this is the network portion. So I'm not going to go into iCloud much, but this is where you log in with your Apple ID to sync all of your data with iCloud. Pretty self-explanatory. It's same behavior as the iPhone. Internet accounts, these are all your mail or server accounts that you could set up, mail, contacts, calendar, messages, and other apps. They'll show up here. Say if you have an Exchange account for work, you would click here and configure it here. Going back, software update, self-explanatory. This computer is enrolled in the Mojave beta program, so it's looking for updates right now on the internet, but it'll show any software updates here, and underneath the software update little pane over here, it'll actually tell you whether or not you're enrolled in beta updates or not. So once this thing loads, it would parse that information. There's no updates available. I patched this machine yesterday. Network, I'm not going to go into because this is where you specify your network information. I am currently connected to a private network, which if I click on this, you'll see the IP address of it. So for security purposes, I will not go into this. If you have any questions about it, please let me know in the comments below and I will be sure to answer those. Bluetooth, very straightforward. You can pair your devices to it. So I got a mouse, I got an external JBL speaker, as well as some Plantronics headset that I paired to this. and you can literally check this box to see the little Bluetooth icon up here, or you can remove it. Doesn't matter. I'll leave it checked. You can also turn off Bluetooth. If you're in secure areas, this might be something that needs to happen. Unless you have an external keyboard and mouse that are Bluetooth, or even the external trackpad, the Magic trackpad, if you turn Bluetooth off, your laptop will revert back into the internal keyboard and trackpad. Now, I feel the need to mention that if you turn off Bluetooth on, say, a Mac Pro that doesn't have a built-in keyboard and mouse, you better have a USB keyboard and mouse handy to plug into it if you disable it, because you will not be able to communicate with the computer once you disable this. So be sure to turn this off if you do not have any Bluetooth devices that need to connect to it. Extensions. This shows any system extensions that may be installed. You can check in here third-party extensions, as well as, you know, Finder extensions or any other functionality extensions to your Mac that you can customize. There's currently none installed. I normally don't use any extensions. Most of the things that I use, I would either create an app for it, like an automation or some kind of a script that'll do, you know, some kind of customization. Right now, I have nothing. I don't use any of these really. I'm a developer. I write code. I write, you know, scripts, and that's pretty much it. I don't have the need to customize my Mac, but some might find it, you know, helpful and useful to do some kind of automations or extensions, I should say. Sharing. This is where you can set up all your services for file sharing. I do have this computer controlled via Apple Remote Desktop, so I can't modify screen sharing, and you can see remote login and remote management are also checked. Internet sharing is checked. I have internet sharing enabled if I'm plugged into a hard line. Basically what that'll allow me to do is it'll allow me to use the wireless card built into the laptop as a wireless access point, so I can connect my phone, my iPad to the internet. So if I'm, say, in a hotel plugged right into the network, there are very few hotels that have hard lines left in their rooms, but some do. And if you're plugged in, you can actually use your computer's built-in firewall and network interface as a wireless access point with a stateful packet inspected firewall, which is a really cool feature. This is computer name where you set it. You can always change this at will. I usually set it and walk away. You can also share printers. You can set up folders for file sharing. If you click on this, it'll allow you to, you know, say you click on that, you can delete it. Actually, first you have to unlock it. So if you unlock this, now you have all those buttons come forward. You can actually go through, and in my case, I usually disable these shares because they're just, in my opinion, not necessary. And also file sharing is off. So printer sharing, you could take a printer and share it. So if you have a desktop or a Mac Pro or an iMac in your house that's got a USB printer attached to it, this feature would give you ultimately the ability to share it out to other computers in your house. Users and groups, pretty straightforward. For normal Macs, you will just create a user account, make it an admin, and then you can have things happen on startup. So you can drag applications into this window that when you log in, they'll automatically open. So for example, if you use mail.app, calendar, and say, you know, Safari all the time, and they have to be up every time you log into your computer, you can just drag those three apps in here, and when you log in, they'll come right up. You can see my second user account on here. This is my production account. Guest user, it's a functionality that basically turns your computer into a kiosk. So you can enable the guest account, again, by unlocking the preference pane. You can actually click on guest user, and you can allow guests to log into this computer. So basically you'll have another user pop up at the login window. that can have the ability to temporarily log in. You know, it basically tells you your guest account don't require passwords, and users cannot log into the guest account remotely. If File Vault's turned on, guest users can only access Safari. So it's a pretty neat feature. Great for kids if you want them to just basically do Safari and nothing else. You don't have to create them a full user account. What's great about this is when a guest user logs out, all the information and files in the guest account home folder are deleted. So, and then you can also have them connect to shared folders. So that's a pretty neat feature. Here is handling for login. You can show the sleep, restart, shutdown buttons. You can show password hints, and also how do you want your login window. By default, it actually lists the users, which some security experts say is 50% of the battle when it comes to hackers getting control of your system. I find it more of a convenience for me, since I do have so many computers, that I use list of users, because it shows me what accounts are on the machine. But for the same purpose, if I don't know the password, then I need to do some further, remediation to get into the account. But if I don't know the username or password, as a hacker, it would make it, pretty hard to get into the computer. Now, there are ways that you can get into the computer, but hopefully, if you practice good security measures, those those shortcomings should be minimized. Automatic login. This is self-explanatory. I have it actually disabled, so that way automatic login doesn't happen. Here you can also have it, how do you want the fast user switching menu, which is actually this right here. You could switch between users pretty much on the fly. How do you want it displayed? That's basically a setting there. Next, parental controls. Self-explanatory. If you have kids, this is great. And then you can create a new user account and enable parental controls to manage how your kids ultimately use the computer. I typically use this on iPads. The restrictions features on the iPads is fantastic. The management of what a 5-year-old can do or not do is paramount in my opinion, especially when there have been cases of kids downloading thousands of dollars worth of apps from the App Store inadvertently, and then the parents are in a pickle and they have to talk to Apple and try to get it resolved. Fortunately, Apple's been great about helping those people out, but they've also made it now possible to control out the box. You don't need any additional software. This comes with the OS. You don't need to worry about it. You just set this up and pretty much walk away from it. The next item here is Siri. Siri is the assistant of Apple, of macOS and iPhone and all things Apple pretty much. And I have her disabled. Now I use the term her because Siri sounds like a girl's name, but I may be wrong. I shouldn't judge. But here you can adjust Siri's behavior, and you can also show Siri in the menu bar. She'll show up, or Siri will show up here. I apologize for my non-gender neutral descriptions of Siri. Next is date and time. Pretty straightforward. Date and time literally controls the date and time of your Mac. So by default, here you set your date. You can see today's date here. The current time that I'm doing this video is here. You should really have a time server, because if your battery ever dies or if your computer ever loses track of time, it'll need to sync to a time server. And this feature again is, you can customize it by unlocking it, checking that box. You can specify any amount of time servers in here. Apple's is built in and it works just fine. Unless you're on a corporate network, then they're usually restricted. I am on a network that's pretty secure right now, so it's unable to determine my location. It thinks I'm in Vegas. I'm not. I'm in Los Angeles, But yeah, so you can set time zone automatically using current location. That is the correct time zone. Here's the actual clock function that's up here. You can change any of these. You can get rid of the seconds. I rely on the seconds for a lot of my my stuff that I do. You can flash the time separators or basically have them static. This 24-hour clock setting is disabled here because remember we changed it in language and region. So if you wanted to undo 24-hour clock, you would have to go back to the main page, go into language and region, uncheck the use 24-hour clock box, and then this box will be available for setting. Date options: do you want to show the date and the day of the week? And then you can also have the computer announce the time, and you can specify the interval if you want it every 15 minutes, half hour, whatever. You can also pick a voice, male or female. They're there. Time Machine, in my opinion, Time Machine is it's a low-end backup utility, and I feel like it works, but it's not quite fully there. And again, this is my opinion. My experience with Time Machine has been that, you know, if I'm restoring a computer from scratch and I need to restore a Time Machine backup, then you know, there's certain things that won't come back. Virtual machines usually don't survive a Time Machine restore, meaning if you're an administrator and you're testing operating systems, if you're working with any amount of you know, system specific files, they may not recover very well with Time Machine, as well as it may not back them up to begin with. I have Time Machine set up. It is literally set up for the purpose of backing up temporary files, pictures, videos, graphics, project files that I create that I am working on. For example, every hour on the hour when this computer is attached, and now you can see that the last backup was literally a month ago, because this computer is literally my demo box and I don't really use it much on my home network, and it's looking for the 6-foot network server, and currently this system hasn't been attached to it, so it's not really backing up. But it's very easy to set up an external hard drive, select the disk, and then literally click this box that says backup automatically, and then you can see here how it behaves. For documents, files, this is fantastic. For anything beyond that, I would definitely have some kind of a third-party, maybe CrashPlan or Carbonite or something that would literally take your data off-site. Because if you're worried about disaster recovery, if you're worried about any form of natural disasters, you know, if you have an external hard drive, say a 2 terabyte hard drive that's attached to your Mac via USB, and the ceiling comes down in your house and destroys your Mac and the hard drive that's attached to it, guess what? You have no means of restoring that data because your backup, your only copy, was destroyed, and the computer that was hosting the data originally was destroyed as well. Just something to think about. Now, there's a whole wide array of cloud-based backups, server-based backups, co-located backups, distributed file systems that go between data centers, etc., etc. The list goes on. I am a backup freak. I have literally had bad experiences in my time where I lost files that were absolutely critical to me, and they cost me some serious heartache during that time. And so backing up my data is absolutely a must. And if you want to know more information about that, please reach out. There's really so many things to talk about when you want to back up your data, and it could be anything. It could be a simple backup, or it could be just the absolute most paranoid, you know, zombie invasion type backup that will prevent your data from getting lost. There's a lot of stuff to consider with backups, and ultimately you can scale it from as small as you want to as large as you want. If you want cloud-based backups, well, then you're adding also the monthly cost of subscriptions and so on and so forth. It's definitely a conversation that we can have. If you're interested, please reach out. I'll be more than happy to offer my opinions, as well as some benchmarks that we have taken over the years with different providers who have helped us recover data. You know, when the time comes, the time comes, but you want to be prepared for it. The last and not least, and I was hoping to do this video in under an hour, which it looks like I may just make it. Accessibility. This is literally the preference pane for any individuals who have a hard time seeing, hearing, and need special accommodations to use a computer. You can also have the computer talk to you. There's a lot of functions and features in here. I highly recommend that if you have any condition that makes it hard for you to use a traditional computer, that you look into this. I know Apple has won some awards even recently on their accessibility features in iOS as well as macOS, and there's definitely a lot of functions here that can help pretty much anybody use a computer effectively. You know, I know Apple invested a lot of time and effort into accessibility, and I believe they did a great job. I've never heard anybody say otherwise. But if you know, if you've heard, if you've had bad experiences with accessibility, please feel free to reach out, and you know, we could talk about it. Anyway, that covers the system preferences on a Mac. This is literally the one-stop shop for settings, for tweaks, for any UI customizations, as well as configuration of everything from printers to sound to backups to creating user accounts for, you know, spouse, kids, what have you. And again, if you break any of this, it's very easy to recover from it. You know, if you somehow destroy your operating system because you've tweaked some settings out of whack, or you disabled your Bluetooth and all you have is Bluetooth keyboards, I recommend you know, not doing that. But in case it happens, it's very easy to reload the OS from scratch and not have to worry about losing your data. The one thing you have to keep in mind with that, though, is do not wipe the disk using disk utility. There's a lot of documentation online about this, so I'm not going to rehash that at this time. If you need to reload the operating system, just go through the wizard. If you find anything that says partition or erase, stop, go back, exit out, cancel, whatever. Because that is the point when you're going to start losing data. If you start wiping or repartitioning disks, there's a good chance that your data will be lost. Anyway, that's all for today. I really appreciate you taking this almost hour to go through this function feature of the System Preferences panel on the Mac OS. If you have any questions, please reach out. Drop us a line in the comments. We'll be happy to get back to you. In the meantime, please subscribe. You know, we love to gain our supporters' ear, and if you have any videos that you would like us to research, or any items of interest that lay close to your heart, please feel free to reach out, and we'll be sure to address them, or at least have a conversation about them and see if it's something that's that can be worthwhile for the channel. Nothing's off the table. We are, like I mentioned before in our introduction video, we are primarily Mac-based, so we'll be fastest on a response to Mac-based issues. However, we do have PCs and Linux machines that we can test and diagnose things, or you know, try to come up with different solutions on other platforms if the situation warrants. Anyway, thank you for watching, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.